Dear students, we have already learned in the sex structure the influence of fertility, which is sex ratio at birth, the influence of mortality, which is sex differentials in mortality, and now we are going to learn as part of migration what is the sex difference in migration and how that can influence the sex structure of the population. So, the main purpose of this session is to make you understand the process of migration through what is known as a gender lens, how the migration varies across males and females, and if so, what are the major reasons for such variation. It is often noticed that human civilization has always been accompanied by migration. Just as the group differentials observed in mortality or fertility, for instance, there are significant group differentials by education, by caste, by religion, and in mortality, fertility, etc. We also have distinct group differentials in the case of migration, which are studied by comparing different characteristics of migrants with those who do not migrate and those who migrate. If you look at historically, migration may have been forced, as in the case of slavery, or as part of the colonization. However, in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, it was the extensive industrialization and urbanization in developing countries that gave rise to huge waves of migration. Presently, around the world, more people are on the move than ever before. Many of them are seeking new opportunities and a better life for themselves and for their families. Others are forced to move due to sometimes disaster or conflict or even war. The reasons for migration generally are traced to various socio-economic and cultural and environmental factors, because as we have already pointed out, the migration have a critical influence due to the characteristics of the population and also the place from where the migrants originate. A person's sex, the sex differentials, whether you are male or female, has a very significant influence on their migration experience. Undoubtedly, gender affects the reasons for migration, who will migrate, and the reasons for that move, and the network in which the migrants often depend on this move. All things are also characterized by the gender differentials. The other opportunities which are available at the place of destination are also often often gender differentiated. The expectations, the relationship and the power dynamics associated with being a man or a woman or a boy or a girl, and whether one identifies as a different sexual orientation, can significantly affect all aspects of the process of migration. That is why gender differentials in migration is often emphasized and often keenly observed for understanding the process of migration. The emphasis placed on existing economic theories of migration, where migration is seen as motivated by economic opportunities. The male migration for economic reasons and female migration for social and family related reasons are often emphasized rather than economic consideration of the females. Thus, the females are often considered as an attached migrant, meaning the male migrate for economic reasons and female follow them because of the reasons for uniting families. The differentials migration by sex is an important area to be studied because internal migration seldom address the question of female migration or sex differentials in migration. More is known about female migration in India than other parts of the countries, for example in South Asian region, because of several reasons. In India, the female migration is known primarily because it is characterized exclusively to some extent by the marriage migration. So, if we consider the migration rates in the country, the female migration rates will be much higher than the male migration, simply because soon after marriage the females move from their natal residence to the husband's residence, which is considered as a migration from one place to the another. In most of Asia and Africa, where the process of urbanization is in its initial stages, the male predominate when migration to urban areas is considered. A completely different pattern, however, was observed in rural migration patterns. Through the previous studies, it was found that rural migration was dominated by females, a pattern very common even in India. This is partly because of the marriage migration of the females from one parts of the village to from one place to the other, or because of it is primarily because of the marriage migration in India. Thus, it has been observed that the selectivity with respect to sex is not the same in the rural streams of migration in the Indian conditions. Gender and migration appropriately can be labeled as a unique migration process because most of the female migration in India, as already pointed out, is in the form of post-nuptial migration governed strongly by the prevailing patriarchal norms in the country. The persisting cultural norms and practices that strongly embody the ideology of patriarchy influence the roles, responsibilities, and rights of women within a family. Thus, gender relations are unequal, and it is household that determines women's status and the role of decision making aspects. Therefore, women migrate only as attached migrants within the household, because the decision making of the migration within the household is often male dominated. Given the robust and growing economy, urban areas are well positioned to take advantage of the benefits of migration. However, the gender inequality in migration is a hindrance in realizing the potential of the benefits of the migration. In fact, with the rapid decline in the fertility in the country, the women can spend more time in the labor force, and through a migration process from rural areas to urban areas, it would have been possible to enhance the work participation of women, which will enable the countries to grow faster. However, it is often found that is not true in the case of India. Issues pertaining to gender are absent in much of the early literature on migration because migration was assumed to be chiefly a male movement, with women either residual in the process or dependent as followers. Earlier, women migrated due to marriage, that is now slowly gravitating towards economic pursuit. If you look at recently, women are no longer can be considered as passive movers. Rather, they also actively involved in migration process for employment and for education, etc. And particularly with the opening up of gender segregated labor market, a significant proportion of women migrate to engage themselves in various specific economic activities, whether it is the nursing, whether it is in the garment industry, we would see a proliferation of the female workers, primarily migrants from different parts of the state of the country. Thus, the patriarchal norms are getting flexible over time in response to changes in socioeconomic structures and are influencing power relations in the household. The expansion of the infrastructure like mass communication, education, economics and healthcare services has elevated the position of women within the families by increasing their access to various resources. All these changes have enhanced the women's ability to make their own choices in their lives and empowered them to take decisions with respect to household matters, including migration. In other words, women empowerment at the household level also gives women a say in the matters of migration decision for reasons other than marriage. The gender and migration also looked at in a way to understand the experience of migration for different sexes, for males and females. The phenomena of female migration is defined and understood in various ways by different people. It requires a comprehensive analysis in the context of the complexity of contemporary pattern of internal and international migration, because the experience each of them have in their respective migration place perhaps would have been significantly different. Such experience has implications for the issue of development and also to understand the relationship between migration and development nexus. The social dimensions of the migration development nexus, including its potential for higher levels of equality with regard to human relationship based on class, ethnicity and gender, are also very important in this context. There is no denying fact that migration plays a very significant role in spurring new opportunities for women to improve their lives and transform oppressive gender relations. It may be a critical source of income for migrant women and thereby promoting increased self-confidence and greater autonomy and instigating upward social mobility. As daughters are sent to towns to work as domestic servants, the girls are becoming economically independent from an early age. They live in cities on their own and send remittances to home, thus promoting autonomous female migration. Let us also look at, to some extent, what is really happening the sex differentials in migration in India. The rapid transformation of the Indian economy, improvements in the levels of education and that of the transport and communication facilities, shifting of workforce from agricultural to industry and tertiary activities have undoubtedly influenced the mobility pattern of Indian people in recent times. Analysis of the pattern of migration, especially at the spatial level, helps us to assess the role of various social and economic factors influencing migration. The spatial characteristics of migration can be studied in two ways. One, by distance covered in the migration, and the other by the streams of migration. Earlier studies showed that the female migration entails a short move and that of the purpose of marriage, and on the other hand, male predominate when migration to urban areas is considered. However, some studies show that the pattern of female migration points to economic reasons as well. Increased mobility of females during the last 3 decades indicate greater movement over geographical distances for jobs as well as for many other economic and social reasons, and also the possibility of more long distance marriage due to increased contracts and improvements in transport and communication facilities. Marriage due to increased contacts and improvements in transport and communication facilities. Let us also look at why in the gender and migration literature, women are considered to be more vulnerable compared to males. Despite the several difficulties and constraints, migration offers women new opportunities, financial independence, in addition to improved status within their homes and communities, and many studies show that there is less sex selectivity in the migration to urban areas in South India as compared to the north of India. During the decision to migrate, many women may have unrealistic expectations, lack of proper information on the migration process, procedures and employment opportunities put them in different difficulties and troubles. They may also lack the know-how and the ability to cover the expenses. Thus, they may end up in irregular and exploitative situations. As compared to men, women migrant workers tend to be concentrated in more limited number of occupations. The migration of women is mostly unrelated to career advancement and skill acquisition. There is enough evidence to suggest that a significant number of migrant women possess skills and qualification often not recognized or often not recognized in the types of work which they perform. Women more than men tend to occupy jobs within the informal sector, which is not covered by any labor legislation or social protection. Women migrants themselves lack knowledge of their rights, fear the authorities and are not organized. The authorities in most destination places treat women migrant workers as workers with limited or no legal rights. In the case of exploitation and abuse, the judicial system is not always construed in favor of the abused worker. The return and the reintegration process for migrant workers can also be more problematic for women than men, because the socio-psychological effect, the family relationship, financial difficulties and employment and related problems are often much higher among females than the males. The recent reports on migration and development have highlighted that the relationship should best work in two broad ways. One, by enhancing the benefits of migration for all stakeholders, whether from the origin or to the destination, and the societies as well as individual migrants. And second, by making migration more of a choice than a necessity. Both points are essentially involve rights issues, the former in the form of transparent legal migration policies which aim to protect basic rights of migrants, and the latter in terms of the right to have, in terms of the right not to have migrate in the first place, which would not only require the creation of more job opportunities locally, but also the realization of broader social policy reforms. Thus, in overall, it indicates that migration literature has often neglected the aspect of gender differentials in migration. While the large amount of data available on the migration shows clearly high proportion of female migrants than male, it has been purely attributed to the marriage migration or the cultural practices which exist in the country. So, the economic reasons of migration, the female often get neglected in the literature as a whole, while the larger opportunities in terms of taking opportunities which will enhance their ability to be independent and which can improve the status of women and empower them in the social economic ladder, it is often found that that process is not really taking place to a larger extent in the country. So, it is time really to think what really are the potential for the female migration to be much larger than what is now available at present, mainly for economic reasons. Thank you.